My girlfriend insisted. We're family. I want to be part of the business. My parents welcomed her with open arms, even saying she was like a daughter to them. Then out of nowhere, court papers arrived. She was accusing them of forcing her work and claiming she had suffered from humiliation, demanding compensation. What she didn't know was that one of her conversations had been caught on camera. So here's the thing. My name's Michael. I'm 27, and I work as a barista in Sacramento helping my folks run their little coffee shop. We're not rich by any means, but we stick together, and this business is literally all we have. It's one of those classic American dream stories, you know? My parents immigrated here from El Salvador back in the 80s with nothing but hope and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. They started this coffee shop 15 years ago in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax office. Not exactly prime real estate, but the rent was affordable, and they figured coffee was something people always needed. My dad worked construction during the day while my mom ran the shop, and slowly, cup by cup, they built something special. I grew up in this place, did my homework at table 6, learned to count money at the register, and got my first real taste of responsibility when they trusted me to open up on weekends during high school. After I graduated, I tried the whole college thing for a couple years, but honestly, it felt like I was studying someone else's life. This coffee shop was my life, and I wanted to be part of making it better. The shop isn't anything fancy, just 12 tables, an espresso machine that sounds like it's having an argument with itself, and walls covered with photos of regular customers over the years. We know everyone's usual order, their kids' names, and who's going through a rough patch. Mrs. Rodriguez comes in every Tuesday for her decaf latte and to show us pictures of her grandkids. Tom the mailman stops by for his black coffee and terrible jokes that somehow always make my day better. My parents are the kind of people who remember when you mention your dog is sick, and they'll ask about it weeks later. They slip extra cookies to college kids during finals week and have never once charged anyone for refills. The profit margins aren't huge, but we make enough to pay the bills and put a little aside for emergencies. That's where Sarah comes into the picture. I met her about 8 months ago at a friend's barbecue. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office and seemed genuinely interested when I talked about the coffee shop. Not in that polite way people fake interest, but like she actually cared about small businesses and family operations. We started dating, and she'd come by the shop pretty regularly. At first, she was just another customer, friendly, always tipped well, and made genuine conversation with my parents. My mom loved her immediately because Sarah would ask about her recipes and compliment the homemade pastries. My dad appreciated that she'd ask about his coffee sourcing and actually listened to his answers. About 3 months into dating, Sarah started staying longer during her visits. Instead of just grabbing her latte and heading to work, she'd hang around during slower periods, chatting with customers and helping carry trays when we got busy. It was sweet, honestly. She'd wipe down tables without being asked and learn how to work the simpler drinks on our menu. My parents thought it was adorable. My mom would beam whenever Sarah would jump in to help, and my dad started joking about having another daughter. They'd never really warmed up to my previous girlfriends as quickly, so seeing them embrace, Sarah felt like everything was falling into place. The transition from customer to helper happened so gradually that none of us really planned it. Sarah would finish her drink and notice we were slammed, so she'd grab a rag and start cleaning tables. Then she learned our ordering system and started taking simple orders when we were backed up. Before we knew it, she was spending entire afternoons behind the counter. And honestly, it was helpful. Having an extra pair of hands during rush periods made everything run smoother. Sarah picked things up quickly. She learned to register, memorized our regular customers' preferences, and even started suggesting little improvements here and there. Nothing major, just stuff like reorganizing the pastry case to look more appealing or suggesting we add new flavor of syrup. My parents were grateful for the help, and I was happy my girlfriend and family were getting along so well. She wasn't officially an employee. We never discussed wages or schedules, but she was there enough that customers started recognizing her as part of the team. The thing is, when someone volunteers to help your family business, you tend to appreciate it without overthinking the details. Sarah seemed to genuinely enjoy being there, and she told us multiple times how much she loved feeling like part of the family. She'd say things like how working at a soulless corporate dental office made her appreciate what we'd built here. Looking back, I realized we never really established boundaries or expectations. Sarah was there because she wanted to be doing what she wanted to do, and we were just grateful for the extra help. It felt natural, like when your friend helps you move and you buy them pizza afterward. Nobody's calculating hourly wages. But about a month ago, I started noticing subtle changes in how Sarah talked about her time at the shop. Instead of saying she was helping out, she'd mention how hard she was working. Instead of talking about learning from my parents, she'd comment on ways things could be done better. Nothing dramatic, just small shifts in language that made my stomach feel a little weird. The first real red flag was when she started referring to shifts she'd worked. Not helped out during, but worked. Like when she'd tell her friends she couldn't hang out because she had to work at the coffee shop. Technically true, but the framing made it sound like she was an employee rather than my girlfriend who chose to spend time helping my family. Then there was the day she mentioned feeling tired because she'd been working so much. I pointed out that she could take breaks whenever she wanted. Nobody was making her stay. She gave me this look, like I was missing something obvious, and said she felt responsible for making sure everything ran smoothly. That word, responsible, stuck with me. When did helping out become taking responsibility? When did voluntary assistance become an obligation? I started paying closer attention to her body language and tone when she talked about the shop. The weirdest part was how she'd gotten protective of certain tasks. If Jenny, our part-time employee, started restocking the pastry case, Sarah would jump in and take over, claiming she knew the best way to arrange everything. If Carlos was handling the register during busy periods, she'd hover nearby, ready to step in if he seemed to struggle with anything. My parents thought this was just enthusiasm and dedication. They'd comment on how Sarah really cared about doing things right. But I was starting to wonder if caring about doing things right was the same as thinking nobody else could do them properly. The breaking point of this phase came last Tuesday. Sarah had been there for about 4 hours, and we'd had a pretty steady stream of customers. Nothing crazy, just normal afternoon business. As she was getting ready to leave, she let out this big sigh and said something that made my chest tight. "I don't know how you guys managed before I started helping out." She said with a laugh, like it was a joke, but the implication was clear, that somehow our 15-year-old business had been struggling along incompetently until she arrived to save us. My parents just smiled politely, but I caught my dad's expression afterward, confused and maybe a little hurt. That night, after Sarah went home, I found myself replaying that comment over and over. Maybe I was being oversensitive, but it felt like she was taking credit for improvements that had more to do with having an extra person around than with her specifically being some kind of business genius. I decided I was probably overthinking things. Sarah was just enthusiastic about being part of something meaningful after working in corporate environments. But deep down, I had this nagging feeling that we were heading toward a conversation I wasn't ready to have. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's behavior shifted from helpful to controlling in ways that made my family uncomfortable. She'd started arriving earlier and staying later, basically treating the coffee shop like her second job, except nobody asked her to do that, and we definitely weren't paying her for it. The changes were subtle at first. She'd rearrange our supply closet because she thought our system was inefficient. She'd suggest new menu items based on trends she'd seen on social media. When customers asked questions, she'd answer them with this authority that made it seem like she'd been running coffee shops her whole life. My mom started giving me these looks. You know the kind. The diplomatic parental expression that says, "I have thoughts, but I'm trying not to interfere with your relationship." My dad was more direct. One evening after closing, he pulled me aside and asked if Sarah was planning to become a business partner or something. I laughed it off, explaining that she just really liked being involved. But his question stuck with me because, honestly, I wasn't sure what Sarah's endgame was anymore. When I tried to bring it up with her, she'd deflect by talking about how much she loved helping my family succeed. The real problem started when she began treating our actual employees like subordinates. Jenny, who'd been with us for 3 years, suddenly found herself being corrected on techniques she perfected long before Sarah showed up. Carlos got lectured about customer service skills by someone who'd never worked in food service before a few months ago. I watched Jenny's face during one of these interactions, and I could see her biting her tongue. Jenny's one of those people who avoids conflict at all costs, but I knew she was frustrated. She started asking me privately if there were new policies she should know about, because Sarah kept giving her different instructions than what my parents had taught her. The weirdest part was how Sarah talked about the business when she wasn't there. She'd refer to our customers and our busy seasons like she had ownership stake. She critiqued decisions my parents made, suggesting they were being too generous with portions or not charging enough for specialty drinks. Look, I'm not saying all her ideas were bad. Some of them actually made sense from a business perspective. But there's a difference between offering suggestions and acting like you're entitled to make changes. Sarah had crossed that line without anyone officially inviting her to. Things came to a head on a particularly stressful Friday. We'd had equipment problems all week. The espresso machine was acting up, our refrigerator was making weird noises, and we were behind on inventory because our supplier had shipping issues. My parents were stressed. I was running on 4 hours of sleep, and everyone was just trying to get through the day. Sarah decided this was the perfect time to implement what she called efficiency improvements. She rearranged our entire workflow without asking anyone, moved supplies to different locations, and started telling customers we were out of items we actually had because she thought our portions were too large. When my mom gently suggested that maybe it wasn't the best day for major changes, Sarah's response made everyone freeze. She said, and I quote, "Someone needs to take charge around here before this place falls apart completely." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad stopped what he was doing. Jenny looked like she wanted to disappear. Carlos pretended to be really focused on cleaning the counter. And my mom just stared at Sarah with this expression I'd never seen before. I tried to smooth things over by suggesting we all take a break and figure things out when we weren't so stressed. But Sarah doubled down, saying she was only trying to help because she cared more about the business's success than anyone else seemed to. That comment hit my parents like a slap. These are people who'd sacrificed everything to build this place, who'd worked 7 days a week for years, who'd put their entire life savings into making their dream work. And here was someone suggesting they didn't care enough about their own business. After Sarah left that day, the atmosphere in the shop felt different. My parents were quiet, which was unusual because they typically debriefed every difficult day together. Jenny asked if she could talk to me privately, and basically said she was walking on eggshells every time Sarah was around. That weekend, I had what might have been the most uncomfortable conversation in my life. My parents sat me down and asked directly what was going on with Sarah. They weren't trying to interfere with my relationship, but they needed to know if she was planning to become an official part of the business. I realized I didn't have a good answer. Sarah and I had never discussed her role officially. She just gradually inserted herself deeper into operations until everyone assumed she belonged there. But belonging somewhere and having the right to control things are completely different concepts. My dad made a point that really stuck with me. He said that in 15 years of running the business, they'd never had an employee, paid or unpaid, who felt entitled to make unilateral decisions. Even family members asked before changing established procedures. I promised my parents I'd talk to Sarah about boundaries, but honestly, I was dreading that conversation. How do you tell someone you love that their help has become a problem? How do you explain that their enthusiasm feels more like a takeover than assistance? Looking back, I realized this was a moment I should have addressed everything directly, but I kept hoping things would settle down naturally, that Sarah would find her place without anyone having to draw uncomfortable lines. I was about to learn that avoiding difficult conversations doesn't make them go away. It just makes them more explosive when they finally happen. The worst part was that I could see how much the situation was affecting my parents. They built something beautiful together, and now they felt like strangers in their own business. That's not something you can just ignore, even when it's your girlfriend causing problem. The conversation I've been avoiding with Sarah happened sooner than expected, but not in the way I planned. We got into an argument about something completely unrelated. I can't even remember what now. And suddenly, all the tension from the coffee shop exploded. She accused me of not appreciating everything she'd done for my family's business. I tried to explain that appreciation and boundaries weren't mutually exclusive. She said I was choosing my parents over her, and I said that wasn't fair because she'd never been officially part of the business to begin with. That's when things got really ugly. Sarah said she'd invested months of her life into making our coffee shop successful, and now I was treating her like some random volunteer who could be dismissed whenever convenient. She claimed she'd single-handedly saved us from going under, which was news to me since we'd been profitable for years before she showed up. The argument ended with her storming out, saying she needed time to think about whether this relationship was worth it if I couldn't see her value. I was honestly relieved. Maybe some space would help us both gain perspective on what had become a really unhealthy dynamic. For 3 days, Sarah didn't contact me at all. No texts, no calls, no surprise visits to the coffee shop. My parents noticed her absence, but didn't comment on it directly. The atmosphere at work felt lighter somehow, like we could all breathe normally again. Jenny seemed more relaxed, and Carlos actually started joking around like he used to. I figured Sarah was cooling off, and we'd eventually have a more productive conversation about boundaries and expectations. I was preparing what I'd say when she reached out, how we could find a balance that worked for everyone. Instead, what I got was an envelope delivered to the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Professional letterhead law office address, and my parents' name spelled out in formal legal language. My hands were literally shaking as I opened it. Sarah had hired a lawyer and was suing my parents for unpaid wages. She claimed she'd been working as an employee for 4 months without compensation, demanding back pay calculated at $15 an hour plus overtime rates for any shifts longer than 8 hours. She was also seeking damages for what her lawyer called hostile work environment and emotional distress. I read that letter 3 times before the words actually sank in. This was the same person who'd insisted on helping because she wanted to be part of our family. The same person who'd said multiple times how much she loved being involved in something meaningful. Now she was claiming we'd exploited her labor and treated her badly. My parents were devastated. My mom cried reading the letter, not because of the money, though that was scary enough, but because she felt betrayed. She genuinely cared about Sarah, had treated her like a daughter, and this was how Sarah chose to end things. My dad was angry in a way I'd rarely seen. He kept saying he didn't understand American culture sometimes, how someone could accept hospitality and kindness, then turn it into a legal weapon. He'd worked construction for years and had seen plenty of workplace disputes, but this felt personal in a way that cut deeper than professional disagreements. The worst part was the timing. Sarah knew we were already dealing with equipment repairs and slow summer business. She knew exactly how much a legal battle would cost us, both financially and emotionally. It felt calculated, like she'd been planning this move while still smiling at customers and accepting my mom's homemade lunches. I tried calling Sarah to understand what was happening, but she wouldn't answer. When I finally reached her, she was cold in a way that made me realize I'd never really known her at all. She said she consulted with friends who told her she had legal rights as an unpaid worker, and she decided to pursue them. I asked her how she could do this to people who treated her like family. She said business was business, and if we want to keep things personal, we should have kept our relationship separate from the workplace. The logic was so twisted, I didn't even know how to respond. We had to hire our own lawyer, which meant spending money we'd been saving for a new espresso machine. The legal fees alone were going to hurt, even if we won the case. Sarah knew this, and I started to wonder if financial pressure was part of her strategy. Our lawyer explained that these kind of cases were tricky. Even though Sarah had volunteered initially, the fact that she'd been there regularly and performed work duties could complicate things. The outcome would depend on proving her volunteer status versus establishing any expectation of employment. The hardest part was explaining the situation to our regular customers. Some of them had gotten to know Sarah and wondered where she'd gone. How do you tell Mrs. Rodriguez that the nice girl who always remembered her grandchildren's names is now suing you? How do you maintain professional composure when your personal life has exploded so publicly? Jenny and Carlos were incredibly supportive, but I could tell they were worried about their own job security. If Sarah's lawsuit succeeded, would other people start questioning our employment practices? Would we be able to afford keeping our current staff? The uncertainty was eating at everyone. Looking back, I realized Sarah had been setting this up for weeks. The way she'd documented her hours, taken photos of herself working, even saved text messages where we thanked her for helping out. She'd been building a case while we thought we were building a relationship. The person I'd fallen in love with had disappeared completely, replaced by someone who saw every kindness as potential evidence and every family moment as a business transaction. It was like discovering that someone you trusted had been wearing a mask the entire time you'd known them. That night, sitting in the empty coffee shop with my parents, we tried to figure out where everything went wrong. Had we been naive? Should we have established formal boundaries from the beginning? The questions were endless, but the answers wouldn't change our current situation. We were about to learn that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones capable of causing the most damage. And sometimes the worst betrayals come wrapped in declarations of love and family loyalty. The day of our court hearing arrived faster than I'd expected. 3 months of depositions, document gathering, and legal consultations had led to this moment. I'd barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario and outcome in my head. Walking into that courthouse felt surreal. This was the same building where I got my driver's license renewed, but now it represented something much more serious. My parents wore their best clothes, the same outfits they'd worn to my high school graduation, and looked smaller somehow in those formal surroundings. Sarah arrived with her lawyer, and I barely recognized her. She wore an expensive-looking navy suit that I'd never seen before. Her hair was different, and she carried herself with this confident posture that seemed calculated for the judge's benefit. When our eyes met across the courtroom, there was zero recognition of the relationship we'd had. Her lawyer was this sharp-dressed guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a legal drama. He had this folder thick with documents and photographs, and the way he arranged everything on his table made it clear this wasn't his first employment dispute case. Our lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was more understated but had come highly recommended by other small business owners. He'd spent weeks preparing us for what to expect, but sitting in that courtroom, everything felt different from our practice sessions in his office. The judge was a middle-aged woman who seemed tired before the hearing even started. Employment disputes probably weren't the most exciting part of her job, but she listened carefully as both sides presented their opening statements. Sarah's lawyer painted a picture of exploitation that was almost unrecognizable. According to him, Sarah had been coerced into working long hours in poor conditions, denied proper breaks, and subjected to hostile treatment when she tried to assert her rights. He had photos of Sarah behind the counter, text messages thanking her for staying late, and testimony from Sarah about feeling pressured to work. Listening to this narrative was like hearing about someone else's life. The hostile work environment? That was my mom asking Sarah to wait before rearranging displays during rush hour. The coercion? That was us appreciating her help and saying she was welcome anytime. When it was our turn, Mr. Patterson systematically dismantled Sarah's version of events. He showed text messages where Sarah had volunteered to help because she wanted to feel like family. He presented security camera footage of Sarah arriving and leaving when she wanted, taking breaks whenever she chose, and clearly enjoying herself while working. The most damaging evidence against Sarah's case was a recording from our security system where she told a customer that she loved working there because it felt like home, unlike her regular job where she felt like just another employee. But the real turning point came when the judge asked Sarah directly about her initial motivations for helping at the coffee shop. Under oath, she had to admit that she'd volunteered because she wanted to be part of my family's business. She'd never been promised wages, never been given a schedule, and had repeatedly said she was happy to help. Sarah's lawyer tried to argue that expectations had changed over time, that an implied employment relationship had developed. But when pressed for specific examples of when this transition occurred, Sarah's answers became vague and contradictory. The judge also questioned why Sarah had never asked about payment if she'd felt entitled to wages. Sarah claimed she'd been afraid to bring it up, but Mr. Patterson had evidence of Sarah discussing other workplace concerns openly, which undermined her credibility about being intimidated. My parents' testimony was simple and honest. They described welcoming Sarah as their son's girlfriend, appreciating her help, but never intending to create an employment relationship. My mom's voice shook when she talked about feeling betrayed by someone she treated like a daughter. The most uncomfortable moment was when the judge asked me about my relationship with Sarah, and whether I'd ever discuss employment with her. I had to admit under oath that our breakup had occurred immediately before the lawsuit, which raised questions about Sarah's motivations and timing. Sarah's lawyer objected to implications about vindictive behavior, but the timeline spoke for itself. 3 days after our relationship ended, she consulted an attorney. The judge seemed to notice this pattern. During closing arguments, Sarah's lawyer emphasized that good intentions didn't excuse labor law violations. He argued that my parents had benefited from Sarah's work regardless of her initial motivations, and she deserved compensation for that contribution. Mr. Patterson countered that volunteer relationships existed throughout American society, from church committees to community organizations, and that Sarah's case would criminalize normal social cooperation if successful. The judge took a 30-minute recess to review the evidence and testimony. Those were the longest 30 minutes of my life. My parents sat quietly, holding hands, while Sarah stared straight ahead with no expression on her face. When the judge returned, she addressed the fundamental question of whether an employment relationship had existed. She noted that while Sarah had performed work, the evidence clearly showed she'd done so voluntarily as part of a personal relationship, not as an employee expecting compensation. The judge's ruling was decisive. Sarah's claims were dismissed entirely. The court found no evidence of an implied employment contract, no evidence of exploitation, and no basis for damages. Furthermore, the judge noted that Sarah's timing and behavior suggested motivations beyond legitimate workplace concerns. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt relieved but also hollow. We'd won, but the victory felt expensive in ways that had nothing to do with legal fees. The coffee shop would survive, but the trust and openness that had made it special felt damaged. Sarah walked past us in the parking lot without a word. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. It was like watching a stranger who happened to look like someone I'd once cared about. I realized that the person I thought I loved had probably never existed at all. That night, celebrating our legal victory felt more like mourning the end of our family's innocence, about trusting people with good hearts. The weeks following our court victory were strange. You'd think winning would make everything go back to normal, but that's not how trauma works. My parents were more cautious around new people. Jenny and Carlos seemed relieved but wary, and I found myself second-guessing every interaction with customers who seemed too interested in our operations. The financial damage was real even though we'd won. Legal fees had eaten up our equipment replacement fund, and the stress had taken a toll on all of us. My mom developed insomnia, and my dad started having chest pains that turned out to be anxiety-related. The doctor said stress could manifest physically, which was news to none of us. But slowly, things started healing. Our regular customers rallied around us once word spread about what had happened. Mrs. Rodriguez started bringing her friends specifically to support us. Tom the mailman left bigger tips and brought us cookies his wife baked. The community support reminded us why we'd fallen in love with this business in the first place. I had to learn how to date again, which sounds weird but was real. Every new person I met, I found myself analyzing their behavior for red flags. When someone showed too much interest in the coffee shop, I'd get nervous. When dates offered to help with anything, I'd politely decline. Sarah had broken my trust in ways I'm still figuring out. About 6 months after the lawsuit ended, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had started dating someone new. Apparently, she was helping out his family's restaurant and had become really involved in their operations. My stomach dropped when I heard this because I recognized the pattern immediately. I debated whether to warn the guy somehow, but what would I even say? That his girlfriend's helpfulness might turn into a legal nightmare? That her enthusiasm could be a setup for future litigation? It sounded paranoid even to me, and I figured he'd learn on his own if Sarah hadn't changed. The closure I'd been waiting for came unexpectedly. A mutual friend mentioned that Sarah had indeed sued her new boyfriend's family for unpaid wages after their relationship ended. The details were almost identical to what she'd done to us. Volunteer help that became a legal claim, emotional testimony about exploitation, and demands for back pay. Learning about this second lawsuit was both validating and heartbreaking. Validating because it proved our situation wasn't personal or unique. Sarah had a pattern of behavior. heartbreaking because it meant she was destroying other families the same way she tried to destroy ours. This revelation helped my parents process what had happened to us. They'd been blaming themselves, wondering if they'd somehow failed Sarah or misread the situation. Knowing she repeated the exact same pattern with different people proved this was calculated behavior, not a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. I started thinking about all the warning signs I'd missed or ignored, the way Sarah had immediately started referring to herself as part of the business, how she documented everything while claiming to help spontaneously, the timing of her legal consultation immediately after our breakup. It had all been deliberate. The coffee shop adapted to our new reality. We implemented clear policies about volunteer help, even for family friends. We documented everything more carefully and had honest conversations with anyone who wanted to help about expectations and boundaries. It felt bureaucratic compared to our old casual approach, but necessary. Jenny became our unofficial assistant manager, and Carlos started learning more complex drink preparations. Having employees who genuinely appreciated their jobs reminded us that most people aren't like Sarah. Good workers exist, and healthy workplace relationships are possible. My parents seemed to age during this experience, but they also became stronger. My mom started speaking up more quickly when something felt wrong, and my dad became better at setting boundaries with customers and vendors. They'd learned that kindness without boundaries isn't actually kindness. It's enablement. I learned that love bombing isn't just a dating phenomenon. Sarah had love bombed our entire family, overwhelming us with enthusiasm and affection until we let our guard down. Then she'd use our gratitude and trust against us in ways that nearly destroyed what my parents had spent 15 years building. The most important lesson was about trusting my instincts. I'd felt uncomfortable with Sarah's behavior early on, but had talked myself out of those feelings because I wanted everyone to get along. Those gut reactions had been accurate, and ignoring them had made everything worse. Today, the coffee shop is doing better than ever. We rebuilt our equipment fund. Our customer base has grown, and the family dynamic feels solid again. We're more careful about trust, but we haven't let Sarah's betrayal make us cynical about people in general. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd addressed the boundary issues earlier, before Sarah became so entrenched in our operations. Maybe the outcome would have been different, or maybe it would have just accelerated her timeline for legal action. Either way, I learned that avoiding difficult conversations never makes them easier. The experience taught me that some people view kindness as weakness and generosity as opportunity. Sarah had seen my parents' immigrant work ethic and family values as things she could exploit rather than qualities to admire. That says more about her character than it does about theirs. Looking back now, I'm grateful for how everything turned out. Yes, it was expensive and traumatic and changed how we operate, but it also showed us the strength of our family, the loyalty of our community, and the importance of protecting what we've built together. The coffee shop survived Sarah's attempt to destroy it, and we're stronger for having faced that challenge together. Some lessons cost more than others, but the expensive ones tend to stick. So, what do you think about this whole situation? Have you ever had someone you trusted completely betray you like this? I'm curious about your thoughts on the whole thing. Was I naive for not seeing the warning signs earlier, or is this just one of those situations where someone's true nature only becomes clear in hindsight? Drop a comment and let me know your take on this story. If you found it interesting, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. It helps me share more real-life experiences like this one. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next one.